Hey, let's go to the phone right now. We promised you that we would bring this gentleman in, and this segment is presented by Papa John's Pizza. Better ingredients, better pizza. Papa John's. Let's go back to talking a little more football. Broncos and Bengals tonight with a guy who knows the Bengals oh so well. He's been doing their games on radio for 28 years. He sits in the color seat, and he also played for the Bengals for 10 years, offensive lineman, Dave Lapham. David, how are you, man?
Les, Woody, what's going on, man?
David?
Hello, Les, Woody, how you guys doing?
We're doing just great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, good. Hey, I want to start out by asking you about the Bengals in prime time. Why under Marvin Lewis, and of course part of that with Andy Dalton, the quarterback, why have they had so many problems performing well, whether it be prime time, playoffs, kind of anytime the spotlight is really shining on them brightly, David?
I think it's because of the caliber of team they're playing against. You know, when you're talking playoffs, you're talking prime time, you're playing pretty good football teams, and this is a team that wins games they're supposed to win, and doesn't really pull off a whole lot of upsets, you know, not a whole lot of memorable victories, and they've won a lot of games. Andy Dalton's won a lot of football games as a starting quarterback. But when you start to look at the matchups that people want on prime time, that's usually against the Broncos and the Patriots and Steelers and teams of that ilk. And it's just they're better, you know. And Andy Dalton is, you know, he's not an elite quarterback. He's a good quarterback, but the elite quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and people like that in primetime games have just performed better. I mean, Andy has not played well enough to beat those football teams and those quarterbacks. That's for sure.
Dave, I'm looking at a great photo on our 70-inch TV screen. This is Woody of you in the booth. So you are bigger than life here in Denver right now.
Oh, that's good.
Les is trying to talk me into picking the Broncos tonight because he's a homer to begin with. But I keep saying to him, teams win the games that they have to. Can you give us an argument of why the Bengals will win tonight?
Well, it's the last home game. You know, it's a must-win for the Bengals. I mean, they have to win this football game to get into the playoffs. Even though they're in first place by percentage points right now, they have not clinched the playoff spot. The Pittsburgh Steelers have. The Bengals have to win another football game to do it. So, I mean, Denver's already clinched their division, and they're probably going to be the number 2 seed whether they win or lose the football game. The Bengals should have a lot more sense of urgency since it's a home game. In the last 2 games, they went on a 14-game stretch where they had 13 wins and a tie, and then it got broken by the Cleveland Browns, who thumped them 24-3, and then Pittsburgh thumped them 42-21. So their last 2 home games against division rivals, they've got stomped. So I think that they want to finish with getting that bad taste out of their mouth with this being their last regular season game. And I think that's probably – I think when you look at all 3 phases of the game, offense, defense, special teams, the only place I can see an edge to the Bengals is in special teams. They've been dynamic in their special teams. It's been their most consistent phase all season long. But, you know, I look at tape and I see Denver's offense and Denver's defense, and Bengals are going to have to try to figure out a way to win one of those 2 phases for sure.
Yeah, Dave, I know you do look at a lot of tape before you go in and do those games. So what are you seeing from the Broncos right now? You know, they're talking about trying to peak by the time they hit the playoff season. In your eyes, do they look like they're close to peaking, or do they still need to make some major improvements in some areas?
I see a team that's transitioning philosophically, you know, a little bit. Watch the Rams tape. They threw it 55 times and ran it 9, and Peyton got smacked around. And that's the only game they haven't scored 20 points in during the season. They only scored 7 points against the St. Louis Rams. So I think at that point in time they said, you know, we got a 38-year-old quarterback who's had his neck fused. We can't subject him to this. So they've been running it like 55% of the time, throwing it 45% of the time in this 4-game winning streak. So I think they're still kind of, you know, transitioning a little bit to that mentality. You know, people are saying, Peyton's hurt, you know, his neck being fused is an issue. He'll be the first to tell you that he doesn't have the throwing arm he used to have, but I'll take Peyton Manning any day. That he's got a beautiful mind. He's got the best football IQ of anybody in the National Football League. He's got a photographic memory. I remember Tom Moore telling me when he was coordinating him over in Indianapolis. He said Peyton would come off the field and say, Tom, remember Buffalo tried this 4 years ago against us, and here's what we did. Boom, boom, boom. And Tom's like, if you say so, Peyton. The guy he remembers everything. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, he'll remember everything about your career, for instance. I mean, he is amazing in his knowledge and study of the National Football League history. And not only that, and you brought up a great point that he told me once, he actually studies coordinators more than he does players, because he knows what coordinators did 4 years ago against him, and that's when you were talking about it. He recalls that. He will think, well, in this play, that this defensive coordinator has a tendency over the last 5 years to do these certain things. That is stunning about him. I would wonder, given that you said the Broncos would have the edge in two phases, defensively, what do you think, because you've followed this so closely, what do you think the Bengals are going to do? Are they going to, because teams have now turned around, you talked about the transitioning, they're saying, okay, let's make Peyton beat us. In the past it was, let's make their
Let's keep
running
it out of
game.
his hands.
Yeah, right. So what would you guess the Bengals' approach will be?
I think the thing they'd like to do is play keep away. You know, the best way to defend Peyton, whether they get a running game. And I am a firm believer in great teams win Super Bowls, not great quarterbacks. Miami Dolphins, best example I can think of. Dan Marino went to one Super Bowl, didn't win it. Bob Greasy, who can't hold Dan Marino's jock in terms of throwing the football, won it because he had a great team. You know, they won Super Bowls. So, I mean, Peyton Manning's a great example. Greatest quarterback probably ever. He's won one and lost two. So it's how great is your team, you know? And so I think what they're going to try to do, any quarterback, great one or, you know, a pedestrian quarterback, his best friend's a solid running game. So the Bengals want to stop the run and run the football. And in that vein, they'd probably be able to keep Peyton off the field. And if he's drinking Gatorade or hot chocolate, depending on how cold it is out there, you know, that's the best thing to do is keep him on the sideline. So they'd like to do that, not self-destruct. They want to take themselves off the schedule tonight. Don't turn it over, give Peyton extra possessions. You know, win the third down battle, win time of possession, and see what happens, in that regard. I think, guys, the biggest key to tonight's game is linebacker play. Broncos are beating up at linebacker. Bengals are beating up at linebacker.
Oh.
I think Giovanni Bernard could be a dark horse out of the backfield matching up on linebackers. And if they start to have trouble in that regard, I can see whichever defensive line can't keep the offensive lineman from crawling up on the linebackers in the running game and then getting linebackers isolated in the passing game. I think that team will flinch first and play their nickel package. You know, and the Bengals will put Taylor Mays out there, a safety linebacker hybrid guy. The Broncos could drop T.J. Ward down to the box and play a nickel. And that way, if that happens, the team that flinches first, who's going to be able to run the ball? When they go small, are you going to be able to run it? So I think that's the biggest domino that might fall in this football game. Who goes to their nickel package first? And if that team goes to the nickel package, can they hold up in the running game?
Dave, who is in your opinion, the greatest center the Bengals ever had?
The greatest center?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bob Johnson, the first draft pick out of University of Tennessee. Paul Brown said 2 guys handle the ball every play, the quarterback and the center.
You fed right, David. You fed right into him.
Bob and
You're
I
talking to a University of Tennessee guy.
Bob and I
He sets you up
Bob
like,
and I,
like in T-ball here.
We
Okay?
went to school together. He was a good friend of mine. That's why that was a setup, Dave. I hope you understand.
He's great, isn't he? That's probably the best guy in the world, man. Bob Johnson. He's been more successful after football. This guy has run companies, bought and sold companies. He's kind of like a mini Trump here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, Bob is sort of to centers as Peyton Manning, talking about a man who has, you called it earlier from the movie, a beautiful mind. Bob Johnson, one of the nicest guys in the world, one of the greatest centers of all time, and has become one of the greatest success stories after football. Dave, we really appreciate you joining us, and I didn't mean to spring that on you on the end, but I knew the answer to the question.
I want to ask you one more question. Dave, I want to ask you one more question if you have time. You got time?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
You guys had one hell of a defensive coordinator there for a long time, Mike Zimmer. He left at the end of last season to become the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. The Cincinnati defense isn't quite what it's been under Zimmer. How big of a loss was he for you guys?
I think it's a loss. There's no question. He was a coach of Zim's caliber. He never let them get comfortable. He's an in-your-face taskmaster, And, the new coordinator is more like Uncle Paulie. Paul Gunther's more of that type of an approach. Now, Paul Gunther was the first lieutenant, the right-hand man that devised all the pressure packages that Zim used. But you lose that 1-2 punch. Paul is elevated to a position, and, now his role is different. Zimmer's gone. I think that there is a trickle down there. Also, Atkins isn't close to the player he was before he tore his ACL last year. Vontaze Burfict played maybe 3 games this year, so they're 2 Pro Bowl players or a shell of themselves. I think that was a big factor as well, and they're not quite the unit they were, no question about it. I think the back end, though, and the secondary, they're about as sound as most people in the National Football League. They do a great job. They have 5 first-round picks at the cornerback position. Nobody's got that kind of depth.
I recommend everybody watching us today or out there in our audience throughout the Rocky Mountain region, turn down the sound on your TV tonight and find Dave somewhere on the dial.
He's fun to listen to.
You've been great at it for a long time, Dave.
And Dave, I want you to know when you called me yesterday and I was at the movies.
Yeah.
I was seeing that Chris Rock movie, Top 5.
Yeah.
I can't recommend it. Sorry.
Can't recommend it, really.
Yeah. Just can't recommend it. Hey, man.
I'll take that into consideration during the holiday season here.
All right. We really appreciate you coming on with us and have fun tonight calling the game.
Enjoy yourself. Thanks
I
again.
enjoyed this immensely, guys. You're 2 legends in the broadcast world, and it's a real pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Dave
very
Lapham, radio color analyst for the Cincinnati Bengals for the
And
last
that segment,
28 years.